The Vhembe district in Limpopo has the highest number of centenarians in South Africa. According to Census South Africa 2022 report, the district boasts over 2,000 senior citizens who are 100 years and above. The proportion who reach this milestone rivals that in Japan's famed blue zone of Okinawa. Now, joining us for more on this discussion, we are joined by Omy Naidoo. He is from the Nutrition Wellness Dietitian and he's the founder. He joins us now via our video link. Omy, thank you so much for your time this evening here in SABC News. Firstly, let's start off here. What is it about the diet that lets people live for 100 years and longer?
It's a good evening to you and your viewers, and thanks for having me on your segment. So if we look at the evidence, a lot of it's got to do with plant-based eating. Plant-based eating is high in fiber. It essentially removes red meat, which is very pro-inflammatory in the diet and linked to lots of chronic diseases of lifestyle. So I think one of the big key elements is the plant-based eating. And then secondly, it's the superfood that we hear about, which is legumes. So these are typically your beans, peas, lentils, chickpeas. These are items that are normally part of the staple daily diet. And a study published in 2019 in the Lancet journal showed that just a cup of beans per day can increase life expectancy by up to 4 years. So there's quite a few elements that can be linked, but it's essentially plant-based eating, lots of legumes. And also, if we're looking at it, trying to avoid processed foods or access to processed foods. It's this processed foods that are high in sugar, high in fat, and typically pro-inflammatory. So they increase the risk for diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, as well as certain cancers.
And Omy, when we look at this community in the Vhembe district, and what do we know about this specific community and how they've been living so that they can reach 100 years and older?
So I think it's important to put this findings in context. You know, living to 100 years is not always equivalent to living with a good quality of life as well as living independently. So there have been other studies, unfortunately, that have been published from similar regions in Limpopo where these specific elderly populations have high morbidity, so they have chronic conditions. They have poor mobility, so they're not very functionally independent. Some of them have difficulty accessing healthcare. So I think, you know, the number of centenarians in a region is not always indicative of the health status of the population. So, you know, essentially, if we're looking at life expectancy in South Africa, the Western Cape still becomes the highest or is the highest region where life expectancy is the highest, with the Free State being the lowest. So it's important to put it into context that when we look at blue zones like Okinawa in Japan, these are populations that live to that 100 years old that are very often functionally independent. They have a very low burden of chronic diseases, whereas it's not always the picture that we're seeing from the findings in the Limpopo region.
And trying to live a very healthy lifestyle, particularly through someone's diet, what would your advice be, you know, to encourage South Africans to even reach 100 years, but also starting in your kitchen being your diet?
So the Japanese in Okinawa have a philosophy, I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation, but it's hara hachibu, which essentially means eat until you're 80% full. So that allows you to ensure that your calorie intake is not excessive, and it lowers your risk for chronic diseases and certain cancers. So I think essentially being mindful of calories is going to help the population to live longer, but also being mindful of your food choices. You know, food is a powerful medicine, or it could be a slow poison. It just depends which types of foods you're having and how often you're having these certain items.
And what foods should South Africans stay away from? I heard you earlier mentioning issues around processed foods. What foods should we stay away from that can hinder the progress of trying to get to 100 years?
So if we look at this population, some of the findings could be related to the fact that they haven't really adopted the Western diet. So super processed, fast foods, high sugar, high fat. They're more on an indigenous diet where they're having lots of fresh fruit and vegetables, not too much of animal protein. But to answer your question, the biggest culprits in the Western diet is fast food. So lots of fat, lots of sugar, red meat, which we've touched on. but also a lot of your sort of treat items, so desserts, cakes, biscuits. All of these have a lot of sugar, a lot of fat, but also highly processed. And that then increases the inflammatory response in the body. And if we look at it, 51% of all deaths are related to diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, and certain cancers. So if we look at the diet we're eating, it increases the risk for these conditions. And we're saying that 1 in 2 deaths are actually as a result of these conditions, which can be reduced or almost prevented through good diet.
All right, Omy, thank you so much for your time here in SABC News. That's Omy Naidoo. He is a registered dietitian and founder of the Nutrition Wellness Dietitians. They're talking to us about how to get to 100 years old through eating pretty much healthy.